How do we ensure that communities don't have to burden the brunt of extractivism again in this new era of energy transition?
Hi, this is Zena Harris.
And I'm Mark Rabin.
Welcome to The Tie-In.
Hey, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of The Tie-In. In today's episode this week, we're speaking with Melina Laboucan-Massimo, who is an incredibly impressive woman, natural-born leader, and near and dear to my heart, is working on solar and microgrids and community engagement and energy independence in Indigenous communities. And yeah, what a great chat. And yeah, I just felt such a kinship to her and her passion for renewable energy.
Totally.
So cool.
Yeah. She captures the heart and soul of the movement and engagement and leaning in to the community. It's just such a lovely conversation. And, I think, we both came away with this feeling of just awe and inspiration for what she's doing.
Right. But she also came by way of a production background.
Yeah.
If I recall, right? So, so it's like, we're always tying in and weaving these threads of production, even though we sort of get out to the fringes of this, but it's still telling those stories, and that's super important.
Yeah.
That's what keeps us going.
Yeah, 100%, 100%. And what keeps us going, speaking of, we were just come out of the Sustainable Production Forum in Toronto.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. It's such a great time, right? Just lots of good vibes and folks coming together. It's so important, right? And you just get the power of the collective, right? You can feel it. There's an energy to it, and people are excited about sustainability. Come on.
And different vibe than Vancouver, right? And different vibe like that. That's the fun thing. It's just to see the two different communities start to evolve into their own, versus it being like in the early days, it was just like the same people kind of, doing it coast to coast. But now it's like they're just going on their own directions.
Yes, definitely. It is a different scene for sure. It is, and you can feel the excitement. It's the folks who came early on that are now leading discussions, right? And they're infusing nuance, and they're infusing their experience. And then students are coming into the fold, and early career people. So it's definitely a vibrant conversation. And Toronto, way to go.
Yeah.
They did it up. So
yeah, love that. and I've been dragging my butt a little bit, but finally was able to lock in one of the last interviews and then review all the footage from my Burning Man interviews.
Yeah.
So better late than never. And so we'll be releasing that hopefully probably end of November, or maybe beginning of December, probably. So those are some awesome interviews with solar punks, dragon wings, a guy in a Tesla Cybertruck with solar panels on it, the Bow Chicka Wow Wow guys. So yeah, I just kind of went out, just nerded out with just the coolest innovators on the playa. So keep your eyes out for that, because that's going to be a fun one from the field.
From the field. I'm always impressed with how you get in there and you find these people who are doing these really niche, really cool things. And
they're all my friends, though. That's the best part. Some, not all of them, but you end up, there's only so many folks out there doing it. Yeah. And I'm just like, whoa, this is so cool.
Yeah. Yeah. So that'll be fun. I'm looking forward to seeing that too. So cool.
Yeah.
And this is a holiday week in the US. So Thanksgiving week.
Yeah, it's a big one. It's bigger than Christmas.
Well, it's the first kind of breath everyone takes, first holiday, in a while, right? And so we're gearing up into the home stretch, and Thanksgiving is a big one, and a lot of traveling. I hope that goes well for people. Stay safe out there. But
And people are giving thanks in general.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So what
What
about
are you
you,
great?
Mark?
Oh, I was going to ask you the same. Uh, what am I grateful for? I'll have to say, like, just the incredible community that I have around me that supported me throughout the last many, many months as I've been on the road and transitioning in this move to San Francisco. And yeah, it's been amazing. You know, I had just a great going away party that I threw myself. I love that. I threw myself a going away party and it was awesome. Yeah. Anyways, this is kind of, it was just fun, but like just so much support and so much love. And yeah, that's what I'm grateful for. What about you?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I'm really grateful for just people being real, people telling their stories in various ways, on this podcast and just the folks that I talk to, just this kind of authenticity and this kind of human spirit is I am really grateful for that right now and kind of this chaotic world that we live in. Just when when you're talking to people and they're just literally like sharing their heart with you, it's
Yeah.
like so heartwarming and just I just want to lean in, and I've been grateful for people opening up, so I'll just say that like it's
Yeah.
definitely needed. So
Yeah. More of that or less hiding behind our phones, being distracted all the
exactly,
time.
maybe that's it too.
Well, thanks for listening, everybody, on this holiday week. And please remember to like and subscribe. Share this. If you like one podcast more than another, share that one. Yeah, we love doing this. So thanks for listening. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to The Tie-In. Today, our guest is Melina Laboucan-Massimo. Melina is Laboucan Cree and was born in her community of Little Buffalo in northern Alberta, also known as Treaty 8. She has worked in social, environmental, and climate justice issues for the past 20 years and is the founder and executive director of SacredEarth and co-founder of Indigenous Climate Action. She is the host of a TV documentary series called Power to the People, which profiles renewable energy, food security, and eco-housing in Indigenous communities. Melina holds a master's degree in Indigenous governance from the University of Victoria with a focus on energy transition, and she is the lead author of the Just Transition Guide.
Yay!
Thanks for
Welcome to
having
the
me.
tie-in.
It's nice to be here. It's nice to talk with you both.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember meeting you and hearing a talk that you gave at the Sustainable Production Forum in 2023, talking about the work that you're doing. And, I'm really excited about diving in here and learning, like, how's it going, what you're up to, how, we're making progress or not, like, and so, but yeah, I just, to start and kick us off, I'd love to just learn a little bit more about you. How did you become interested in solar and environmental and social justice and also TV?
That's a big question. I Well, let's start first with, yeah, coming from my home community, which is Little Buffalo and in northern Alberta, and um, one of the first probably pretty internationally known experiences that my community went through was in 1988. I was 7. And there was a big, massive blockade that got international coverage because our community was kind of a little bit overwhelmed with the influx of, more than overwhelmed, but the influx and the kind of the health concerns from the community of the oil and gas and logging that was happening. And I, back in the day in 1988, we Indigenous peoples weren't really in the news. There was a complete erasure, I would say. So for Indigenous peoples to be kind of getting international coverage, and it was timed around the time of like the Olympics in 1988 and just some of the boycotting measures that were taken. And so a lot of people older than me and my parents' generation kind of know our nation name. They're like, oh, you're Laboucan, because they had heard about it back then. And that was, out of sight, out of mind for Indigenous peoples, I would say, for kind of the Canadiana like narratives and kind of understanding of our point in history at that time. I would say we're fast forward to 2025, very different. I would say the Truth and Reconciliation Commission and the kind of discussions and dialogues and the relearning of history, are like the learning of history that is Canadian history for a lot of Canadians, in terms of kind of the colonial policy and impact of residential schools and a lot of other colonial policies. I would say, coming from a community like that, I guess I was 7, so I didn't really understand the immensity. I was just there with my family. Oftentimes, my mom said sitting in the car just to be safe, but she was there with my dad and my kokum and my Muslim, my grandparents, and all the kids in the family. So I would say that was like a probably in my very, very deeply in my subconscious. But also what is, I would say, more took precedence was just experiencing the beauty of our homelands in the horse and wagon with my grandparents as a young child, going out into the bush, as we call it, and just being there and seeing. I remember standing up in the horse and wagon and just seeing like the beauty and the like lush green, that I kind of was raised in and around of that. And then as I got older, started to see the impacts more and more of industry and the kind of more even from 1988, the increase and the ever increasing impacts of oil, gas, tar sands, fracking, logging in our territories. And that really informed me as a young person. But also moving to the city eventually, when my mom wanted to go back to do her master's degree, and works as a psychologist now with residential school survivors and has for decades. I really, it was very eye-opening for me as a young person coming from a northern community and seeing how my family was still without running water, and then here in the city there was swimming pools and libraries and all of these like resources that small Indigenous communities still to this day do not have access to. And I think it was like a politicization, even though I was so young, again, in the subconscious of being like, something's not right. There's a major discrepancy here. And it just started to kind of, I would say, like make me a little bit more aware. And so by the time I was, 19, already in university, for a number of years, I really wanted to start working in community. And so became, like at that point, a youth worker and tutoring young Indigenous peoples as I was in university, going into schools and working from, young age, like kindergarten to high school with kids. So I kind of started doing that community work from a young age, so 19. And so fast forward to 25 years later, it's been, I would say, very community based, and then start doing international kind of political advocacy. And but also, yeah, I feel like the narrative of telling stories comes from a generational inheritance of my dad being a storyteller, that as a young Indigenous person that was hidden from residential schools. As the youngest of our family, my aunts and uncles all went to residential schools. So by that point, when my dad was born, my kokum and Muslim, my grandparents realized something was terribly wrong. And so they actually hid him in the bush. So he was raised for the first decade of his life learning stories in Cree, right? So very old, like before the last ice age kind of stories. And so I grew up with a storytelling dad of like really learning those older stories, and he knows them much better than I do, in Cree. And often he would translate them in his head into English and then tell us as young kids. And so having that as a part of, I'd say, a foundation, and a lot of other amazing things of having an amazing mom, and being put into like dance or sports, and so being able to communicate on stage and not being afraid. I would say that really helped. And then getting into eventually filmmaking as in my early 20s, so 2 decades ago, and worked at the Indigenous Media Arts Group, and then worked at a magazine before social media existed. So magazines were the way to tell stories at Redwire Native Media Society. So we produced and wrote, and Indigenous artists and Indigenous writers, and filmmaking. And so I was doing filmmaking, and then kind of trying to distribute The retelling of history, and speaking of history to our peoples, and then to kind of helping to educate more people. And this was, much more before the TRC. So it was a lot of times people didn't even really know about residential schools at that point or the history. And so people would kind of look at me like, what do you mean that happened? And I'm like, you're literally from here. So it was, it's using storytelling as a way for people to really understand, whether that be through print, film, or just, oral storytelling, I think has really helped people understand the impacts of what our people have inherited, but also the changing over of, I would say, a paradigm shift that we really need to see in the Western ideology of kind of what you do to the land, you do to yourself. And I think that's something where Indigenous values really help inform how we can move forward in the era of the climate crisis.
Yes, absolutely. Just a quick note. I mean, have you been able to capture these stories from your father?
I should try. My dad actually did that as a part of, I think, his first degree. He also has a master's in education and linguistics. But I think in his first degree, I remember him going around and interviewing a lot of elders that in Cree before they had passed on, because a lot of those elders have now passed on. So he's done that. I think it's probably my turn to do that with him, but it's really hard because he is the chief of our community. So he's very, very busy. They finally settled our land claim that was outstanding for decades, and now they're rebuilding houses and bringing in running water and like a school that, because there's a very old school that's been used in the community for like over, I think, 4 decades. And so it's just, a lot of rebuildings happening right now, ideally for the benefit of the community.
Yeah. Yeah. So it sounds like a real momentum in the community work, the community building, which seems quite positive.
It's positive. I think it's just a long time coming where it's a lot of like very pronounced and I would say enforced poverty. And so that, I think it's part of colonial policy where even when kind of the starvation tactics that were happening and then ration systems and like the welfare dependency, those are all, not those are man-made, right? So it's a colonial policy that's really impacted communities. And so it's kind of this it feels more like a crawling out of like coming out of as opposed to it is a momentum though as well, and there is ideally, I hope, long-term change and but there's a lot of healing to be done too. I say across the country, both within communities, but also between neighbors, with settler and not non-Indigenous peoples and Indigenous peoples. And so I think there's a lot of still, I'd say, when we use the term reconciliation, what does that really mean? And how genuine is it? Is it just an apology and or a land acknowledgement, or does it go beyond that, for people within their hearts of doing the homework of really understanding that legacy on both sides?
Yeah. And so part of the work then in terms of reimagining the community, is that's involving renewables and energy resiliency. And can you speak to us a little bit about that work? And I'm assuming that dovetails into SacredEarth as well. But yeah, it's the opportunity now. We have the technology today to do this, to bring clean water, to electrify communities, to have autonomy on their own, energy sovereignty as well.
Yeah, and I mean, I think we know that we even had the technology 40 years ago for talking about solar, right? And it's just kind of a little bit of a detriment that we hadn't implemented it then to really kind of offset fossil fuel expansion and impact. And so it's again, it feels like the catch up, where you're trying to implement projects where I was like, man, I just wish these were like implemented like 20 years ago or like 30 years ago. But that was definitely the genesis of SacredEarth was going back to do my master's, and saying like, oh, I just really want to figure out how to implement, as opposed to a lot of people are talking about climate change and I was talking about it. At that point I'd already been traveling internationally, speaking in US Congress or like British Parliament or Norwegian Parliament, speaking to investors, saying like there's these impacts and you need to be aware of where your investments are going and how it's impacting our communities and water and the climate and the GHG emissions that need to go down, not up. And so I did a lot of like trying to stop the quote unquote bad, stopping what we really need to see stopped, to actually abate the climate crisis. And when we had a big oil spill back home, in 2011, it was pretty devastating because you're, trying to respond on the ground. Um, People can't breathe, their eyes are burning, all of these impacts that, with the toxic fumes wafting into the community from a massive, one of the biggest oil spills in Alberta and Canada's history at the time. So I was just like, it just at that point had already been for years speaking about these issues and just saying like, I can't even stop the impact on my own community. My own family can't breathe. What do I need to do differently to start rebuilding what I want to see and like envisioning a future that I actually want to see, as opposed to there was a lot of talk and still is a lot of talk. But we really need to see the implementation phases happening yesterday, and so
Yeah.
it was about starting to rebuild and really understand what are the challenges to rebuilding, like to building a new energy transition future, and what are the benefits and how do we get it done, and so that was a part of my master's thesis project, was putting up a 20.8 kilowatt system that powers our health center in Little Buffalo, and just really like using that as a case study of how is this possible and how do we do it? And I really didn't want to just write another paper that, sat in a book on a wall. I wanted to see how it's possible and how maybe ideally could create a seed for future generations, for young kids that are literally can see the solar panels every day as they go in from grade 5 to grade 12, and really get them to start thinking that this is possible. And a lot of people at the time when we had put the project in 2015, were like, I've never seen solar panels before. I've never seen them in my life. And my auntie was like, I never thought I'd see them actually ever in my life. I thought I maybe just see them on the satellite TV that we now have, And so it was really about that kind of bringing in the technology to a community that wouldn't have otherwise access it, and been able to put it up.
Right. And then have you started to include batteries and energy storage as well in those
There's
applications?
not in our home community. Our home community is grid connected,
Okay.
fortunately, so we're not diesel dependent, because that's so expensive and also
Yeah.
really bad for for the health. Like they are connecting diesel inhalation. There's been some studies from diesel inhalation to dementia, right? Of course,
Hmm.
it's so toxic, right? And I get headaches immediately when I breathe it because I've
Hmm.
spent too many years doing environmental campaign work in toxic zones in the tar sands. And so um, I really wanted to see the implementation in my home community. But then as people saw that project go up and, start producing energy, people started contacting me and say, can you come here and build this project, can you come and help build this project? And I was like, yeah, let's do it. And so instead it was originally Laboucon Solar, and then it became SacredEarth Solar, because we started doing kind of solarizing across the country in communities in Secwepemc territory, in Wet'suwet'en and Gidendam, frontline communities that were really trying to protect their homelands, like Fairy Creek, sent projects up. And then we out east as well, in Indigenous language revitalization, and Indigenous art studios and healing lodges. We solarized out in Ontario, and we've just actually finished at SacredEarth our, I think, ninth or 10th project. Starting to lose count, as we usually build on like 2 to 3
Yeah.
a year, but in Saskatchewan. So, and then we're hoping to build a larger one next year, again here in Alberta, fingers crossed, and to kind of start seeing that across the country. But so yeah, so I've been able to do off grid and on grid, so
Yeah.
batteries, and then
Yeah.
but then I've also seen like the amazingness of the innovative technology through filming Power to the People and being able to have the privilege to go into over a dozen Indigenous communities from coast to coast and talk to a lot of researchers and energy developers around implementation through a host of other types of technology. So like wind or geoexchange or district energy or run of the
Yeah.
river. So lots of different types of renewables that fit for the region of where can make the most kind of energy and impact, and ideally less impact to the land.
Yeah. Yeah. I can bless
Bless
you,
you.
Mark. um, I can imagine, it takes a while when there's interest in a project like this, it takes a while to get it off the ground, and probably a lot of community engagement and whatnot. Can you walk us through a little bit about how that goes, and like how folks in the community um, you know, learn, maybe more of the technical skills or embrace it in different ways? I'm really curious about that.
Yeah, we always bring in training. We've learned in building projects, because again, the point of having the Just Transition guide written and why I conceived it is because I didn't have a how-to guide, starting over a decade ago of actual implementation work. It was okay, who should I call? Who should I hire? Doing the research, and just there wasn't a guide of like, these are the best ways to kind of move forward. And so after learning through implementation in my own community and other communities, we really do now prioritize even more so. We did always training on the ground whenever possible. Through COVID, it was a bit more challenging, to be honest, to build projects, but now we always have training on the ground for people in the community to ensure that they are learning about what solar is, how does it function, about the climate crisis, dialogues and just transition, and having that kind of analysis of understanding energy transition from a justice lens. But we really try to prioritize that now on the front end of the build. So we don't approach communities. We'd rather communities approach us. I think as Indigenous peoples that work at Sacred Earth, we have had so many outsiders approach us about, oh, this is a good idea, or we should do this, or we can make money this way. And it's like, I don't want to be, we're a nonprofit organization. We are not a company to make profit off of communities. We want to build in partnership with communities. So oftentimes it's just people approaching us and saying, is this something that you can support us with? And we, have initial meeting with the proponents from that community, because we want people from within that community to be building. And I think that's ideally with the energy transition is people building. The projects are from that community.
Yeah.
And so they're the proponents, not outsiders kind of pushing a community to do something that may or may not be in the best interest of that community. So we often, form partnerships that way through kind of a more organic process where we have initial meet and greets, and say, okay, this is something we can help you with. And oftentimes, because there is or isn't financial support, we often help the community to fundraise for the project so that we can build the project with the community and kind of build it at the speed of trust. And so we make those initial kind of connections and have that relationality that I think you probably have heard a lot of Indigenous peoples are like, it's really about relationships. It's not about transaction. And so it's kind of building with the community of what is your needs and how do we build it to like meet your needs, as opposed to as if we have some outside agenda. So it's more that build. And then once that's formulating, we can go ahead. We're like, okay, we have the funds. We're like ready to kind of ideally build this. It's also ensuring that the community also wants to have that build, and it serves the needs of the community ideally as a whole. And that's a part of as well with Sacred Earth is kind of the community we don't really use the word consultation. It's more like community engagements where we can really talk to the community about the issues at hand of the climate crisis and in that framework and context. And sometimes I feel like even the clean energy sector, it's often void of those conversations around it's about, yes, reducing GHG emissions or ideally abating the climate crisis, but it's also for Indigenous communities, it's really about how do we ensure that communities don't have to burden the brunt of extractivism again in this new era of energy transition, like we have had to burden the brunt of oil, gas, tar sands, fracking. It's often on the bodies of Indigenous peoples, myself included, where I have a medical diagnosis because of overexposure to fossil fuel extraction areas, right? And the inhalation, the breathing around it without PPE. So there's these types of issues where we kind of want to build that relationship and then bring in the training, bring in curriculum. And so with the release of our Just Transition Guide in 2023, we launched a Just Transition Guide, which is 180 pages of close to 10 years of research and writing. And then we kind of have 7 chapters. My master's thesis is like chapter 3. And we really are taking that at SacredEarth and building that into curriculum so that the curriculum can be taught in communities. And we actually just came back for a second time from my home community, this type of education that I wish I had 10 years ago, which we were just at the beginning phases. And so bringing that curriculum into community here in Alberta, but also across the country, where we'll go into communities, and we've presented this information at conferences, at universities. And so there's been a lot of interest, which has been nice. And yeah, we're kind of at that stage where we're really trying to build in curriculum to the education piece, because I think the reason why the climate change exists is because we don't have that type of curriculum and education in our educational systems. Like it's really missing in our school systems around what happened. Turning off a light bulb and turning on a light bulb is kind of the extent of it. Here's the circuitry and here's how it works, but how do you connect it to impact to land, right? And so if you have a really good teacher, ideally they're teaching that, but sometimes it can be often void of what is seen as political when it's really not political. It's like the natural law of Mother Earth and how much she can sustain our impact, right, as humans. And we're kind of seeing ourselves getting to a precipice of that because we're not living within the natural law of Mother Earth. And so we really are living out of alignment with that.
Yeah, out of alignment with living systems.
Yeah.
I know one thing that always comes up to me is there's also opportunities for innovation, alongside partners with technology groups and government and so on. Is there an opportunity, or do you guys bring in new technologies as well to sort of prototype them? And do you find that there's sort of more innovative communities than others as well that are more open to this kind of stuff? Because that's the one thing, because there's so many amazing communities and also different environments, right? It's not all sunny-ish Alberta, right? You've got different communities have different needs, as you mentioned, from even the Arctic and so on, and probably not so sunny during the winter. Yeah, I was just wondering if there are other technologies that you guys are talking about, and is there a framework for innovation within that as well?
I would say for Power to the People, when we filmed Power to the People, we really profiled what communities are doing across the country and then put that into the Just Transition Guide. So we talk about the different types of technologies in chapter 4 of the Just Transition Guide of what communities are utilizing and what is even considered oftentimes green or clean, right? Because I think there's also a debate around clean energy in terms of mega dams. Many communities don't experience that as clean. There's a lot of methane and there's a lot of impact.
Yeah.
Same with nuclear, right? There's literally villages of widows where we've dealt with nuclear. Indigenous communities have dealt with nuclear for decades, and a lot of sickness and impact to the land, let alone like things like Chernobyl. But so we talk about kind of the good, the bad, and the ugly in the Just Transition Guide, and we talk about community testimonials because I think it's important to hear the stories of communities as opposed to just like we worked with a lot of engineers to write the Just Transition Guide. So we had the technical kind of the innovation of explaining how the technologies work, but we also need to really understand how they're impacting communities on the ground, or how they're benefiting or not benefiting communities on the ground. And so I think that's a really important piece of the stories that oftentimes we don't always hear, even in the media. So it is about innovation, but it's also about community testimonials. At Sacred Earth, we've been mostly using solar as the kind of mainstay of the technology that we're using, but we're also expanding into seed storage facilities for communities, in terms of food sovereignty initiatives as well, because it's not just within the energy transition, it's not just energy, it's also like, how are we going to eat and survive a climate crisis? When we see what's happening right now in Jamaica, or like, how do communities even become resilient after they're impacted by a massive forest fire or a massive flood? Are they going to have access to food? So we're starting to expand on, and probably in next year, and I won't name the community yet, but we've been in discussions with a community in so-called BC, and in their community they have a food greenhouse that they want to solarize. So we are looking at kind of how you combine the technologies. But I'd say the other piece, that we often don't talk about when we're hearing about renewable energy, is food sovereignty, but then also energy conservation, energy efficiency.
Yes.
That also needs to go hand in hand, and oftentimes needs to precede the implementation of renewables, because we know that we're just using so much energy that we really don't need to be using. And I think that also why it's important to talk about it even within the sustainable production field, like for filmmaking, because I feel like it's just something that's mind-boggling too, the amount of uses of resources that we really shouldn't be using. And then it's like a throwaway culture that we live in, and it's, nothing is throwaway. Everything has an impact.
Yeah, that's so true. And I loved what you said earlier, and I really just I love to get your perspective. This idea, your experience with really developing relationships and really focused and rooted in that, as opposed to sort of this transactional mindset, because I feel like a lot of society is set up very much as a transactional kind of mindset or relationship. And I'm wondering, like, how you're navigating that between really leaning into relationships and then also, dealing with, part of society where you may need to get, equipment, or deal with, government or different things where it is very much transactional. How are you navigating those differences? I struggle with it, so I'm just curious. What can I learn here?
I feel like for a long time, as an Indigenous young person, and just seeing the impact of late stage capitalism, and where we're at in the climate crisis, because capitalism is also responsible for the climate crisis, and it's a system that predicates as if there's like this infinite amount and like this expansion that we can go above and beyond. And as we said already, like living out of the bounds of living systems and what we say natural laws. And so I really shied away for a long time from trying to engage with this system of like money and things like that, because it's really uncomfortable as an Indigenous person. So I think it's like a traumatic thing, to be honest. And I have a friend, Chantel, talks about it, and just actually released a book, but does a training called Trauma of Money, and like how people actually have a lot of trauma around money, right? And we do, because it's a traumatic thing. It's impacted us in great ways or really detrimental ways. And so that for me was like, oh yeah, there's this kind of like trauma around it. And so I kind of stayed away from it. I was like, I think it's why I still run a nonprofit, because I'm like, if this isn't this life is for me isn't about making money, that isn't my end all be all. It is about, I feel like I came into this world because I was meant to at this point in time. It's kind of scary to face the climate crisis, to be honest, of what were kind of the projections of the next 20, 30 years. But I feel like I came into this world to, yeah, and it sounds cliche, but like to leave it better than I found it, or to try to make the change that I want to see. And it's about kind of that passion for restoration, for justice, for yeah, kindness, for like love and connection. And it isn't, for me, my end all be all is never the bottom line. And I feel like that has actually served me quite well. Like I feel very blessed to kind of feel like I've never had to go after, you know, hurting a community, hurting somebody over like money, which I think it happens way too much in this world. And so I feel like with at Sacred Earth for us, it's just about having those relationships as we fundraise, and having even the people at the foundations where there's this generational wealth oftentimes, and oftentimes wealth that's been created off the backs of Indigenous peoples. That wealth exists there for a reason, and it was oftentimes for extraction on land or hoarding. So it becomes this very complicated system. And so it's really about knowing that there's people on the other side, right? And not like dehumanizing people when we have to have these conversations, and oftentimes uncomfortable conversations, right? And I think that's where diplomacy comes in, for me on my end anyways, of just still being able to speak the truth, but in a way that's kind and in a way that's honest. And so for us, having conversations with, say, funders and things to that nature, it's often to say like, we're doing this and these are the reasons, and just clearly communicating why we're doing it. And so it's for the benefit of other communities. But yeah, I'd say it is definitely a hard one because it is complicated, and it is hard to kind of I'd say the other thing that I've learned as I've gotten older is the ability to say no in a hyper capitalistic model where it's like this extraction thing of like take, 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 take. And I think when I was younger, I was like, oh my gosh, somebody wants to hear me speak or do this or travel over here and all these things. And I've been able to travel the world to go support and help with things. But sometimes it's actually been at the detriment of my own wellness and health. So I think it's also about knowing the value, and it's probably not, for me, it's not a numerical value, but it's knowing the value of my own wellness, and prioritizing that in a system that oftentimes doesn't prioritize the wellness of people. And so I think that's something that I've really had to learn, becoming bedridden and being like, oh, like I did this to myself, quote unquote, but I also allowed other people to do this, but it's also a system of extraction and hyperproductivity that really is at the detriment of like human beings. And I'm one of those human beings, and I deserve to not be a martyr and be like this person that's like, oh, it's not enough. It's never enough. I'm not doing enough, even though I'm doing a shit ton and a half. And it just feels like you're never doing enough. And I just feel like that's a part of, again, of the lie of this system that really doesn't prioritize human health and like wellness. So I think that was something I've had to learn the hard way over the past 25 years.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
I feel like
it's the greatest challenge of our time. Yeah.
Speaking to my soul right here. I love it. Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. And I sometimes I feel like we don't even realize we're in the system doing the thing that we're doing. I even learned a term recently called ethical fading, where you don't even realize like your ethics, like you might have, years ago, maybe when you were young and you were, but as you've been kind of churned through the system over and over, you kind of, things just become more okay, and your ethics just kind of fade away. And that might explain kind of where we are right now. I don't know, but it was just really interesting to kind of look at work through that perspective. And it's kind of what you're describing.
Yeah. And I feel like often too, like another term I learned from a friend, Naomi Klein, like years ago, was this like cognitive dissonance of just people, or it's like you're not able to even like hold the dichotomies oftentimes, or like the polarization. And it's just this dissonance that we're living in right now too. And sometimes, and also I think a lot of what I've seen people experiencing and sometimes experience myself is this like climate grief and the climate despair. And it's just it's hard to people often have to turn away from it, and it's unfortunate, right? Because I think again in this system of like social media and this like clickbait kind of um place of being, we often uh, people can desensitize, right? And that's really
Hmm.
detrimental and creates that apathy that we really don't want to see, because people can become like now a part of like this virtual world, and as opposed to like looking at the actual
Yeah.
world, and being like, oh shit, we need to do something, right?
It's such a complex problem, though. I think that's where we struggle, right? I heard the term like poly crisis, and then there's a meta crisis too. I mean, it's just so huge and so complicated, and we're just like, yeah, sometimes it's easier
Overwhelmed.
just to turn around and say, okay, look, I got to put food on the table, and I've got to go do this and do that. Um, and we talk a lot about it here too. I mean, this is where the power of storytelling, this is where the power of bringing different voices to the table, because we have the answers, right? I mean, we have the technology, and you're showing it with just even the little incremental step of putting solar in key areas in your communities. Um, but yeah, I think that's kind of the challenge. So how much are you going back into working with the elders and working with the again these stories to kind of bridge that sort of more ancient knowledge and sort of the new technologies that are coming in? Is there a bridge there? Are you able to create that um, to sort of bring ease to it and bring yeah, sort of bring those ideas forward, but bridging the sort of older stories and knowledge to the newer world, because we can't ignore our destined collective human future of technology, right? I mean, that's probably one of the things that caused us to get here, and also one of the things that's going to help us move forward. But there's this ancient, and there's deep knowledge from the past that has to be
I,
a part of it.
yeah, I would say the stories inform values, and the values live and exist within us as a peoples. And so oftentimes if you're like a carrier of those values, even if you don't know the stories, right, those stories inform a lot of what Indigenous peoples know today. And so that's often the values are kind of the carry through. And also I think people are reclaiming ceremony, and which was prohibited, which was illegal in this country until 1960.
Hmm.
So, it had to go underground. Speaking our language was illegal. Not allowing your children to go to residential school was illegal. So there was a lot of things that were illegal and prohibited for Indigenous people. So a lot of that knowledge had to go very much internal and stay kind of the course within the hearts and minds of the people until it could come back out and be more public and kind of continue to inform who we are as Indigenous people. So I'd say the values are that carry through, and the values inform me as an Indigenous person of how I engage with the world, whether that be through utilizing technology or not utilizing it. I think because I'm an X, as they call it, X-lennial. I'm kind of in that generation X and millennial.
Zennial.
I like saying X-lennial, but yeah, zennial.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm a Zennial
Are
too.
you
So
zennial?
Zena.
Yeah.
So Zena.
Yeah, and so I feel like there's like this thing too where I mean I'm not a big, like I can use the technology, I'm like fine with it, but it's like I'm not kind of this avid adapter. Like I'm talking mostly about the phone because I just like it's such a detriment to I feel like people's like mental well-being and brain health. So but I think with the values it informs kind of the implementation, right? And for me, why I gravitated towards solar was, yes, we're in Alberta and one of the sunniest provinces in the country. And also we're in a place where there's extreme extractivism happening, and we're partially Canada's a petro state because of Alberta, right? And so that of seeing the impact, and then like what's a response, what's something that we can implement that doesn't constantly produce GHG emissions, right? Because it's for fossil fuels, it's from the point of extraction to the end use is all GHG emissions, right? It's just like emission all along the line of usage. And so for us with solar, it was like, once we get this project up, it can produce energy with no emissions for over 25 years. There's warranties for panels, right? So it's just this idea of lessening the impact of our footprint on Mother Earth. And so that, for me as an Indigenous person, made sense of trying to make that switch in terms of lessening the impact on Mother Earth, the animals and people, and the atmosphere. And so it's all of these, that's what informs and I'd love to send you both a video. I don't know I think I might have shown it. Maybe you saw it at the Sustainable, but it's a short one of my community when we first implemented. I feel like that really shows kind of the values and the ethic around it. But I'd be
love to reshare.
Yeah.
Share it too.
Okay, cool. Yeah. And I would also be remiss to say, though, is that with the energy transition, there is this new kind of discussion that we all need to have around critical minerals and really understanding the extractivism again of what that means, right? And when the government, say for instance, is saying we need to extract more critical minerals, is it for the benefit of communities? Is the impact going to be on community again? Or is it for because there's again with the end use, where are those minerals going to, and who's benefiting, and who's making money off of it, first of all. And then also, what is it being used for? Is it actually being used for renewable technology, or is it just being used for more military, which we know that it's really being sought after for like military materials. So I think it's or is it used for medical? So I think really understanding where the percentage of where that's going, because again, are we going to have to consent? Is the burden going to be on the backs of Indigenous peoples in those remote areas where that extraction happens? And we can also see really what's happening in the Congo is so horrific, of the extraction of lithium and how literal children are being put into these mines and to extract, and literally breathing in the lithium and just having no PPE and having no ability to protect people's health. And so we really need to understand, when we talk about energy transition, is it going to be a just one or not?
Yeah. I mean, and even further to that, I mean, we don't even upgrade our resources even. So it's like, get it out of the ground and get it out of here. So we're not even capturing even that, that sort of like upside of the sort of, the upgraded, to use it in here to build our own economy too. So I think that, that's even, there's so many complicated things here in Canada that, economically as well. I struggle with it. It's like we can't even tie our shoes in the morning. I think that's half the battle, and I can't even imagine the frustration of the Indigenous communities, because I'm living in Vancouver and I'm frustrated. I couldn't even imagine the frustration there. At the same time, I think this is where taking it into your own hands and showing how it's done, right, and bridging that gap with the land, with living systems. We need that. We need more of that.
We do. And I think the stories aren't being told. And I think this comes back to the storytelling narrative, and also just the ability for stories to be filmed and recorded and shared nationally and internationally. And that was a part of making Power to the People, because I wasn't seeing these stories on TV.
Yeah.
And why aren't we? And why aren't we like, there's literally like, we didn't have enough funding to go to more communities.
God.
Like
Yeah.
we went to like, and there was more people were after they saw Power to the People from the US and
Yeah.
internationally
Yep.
were like, can you come to our
Everywhere.
community and profile what we're doing? This is what we've just did. And we're like, we literally were filming for a number of years for Power to the People. And it was just like the bare minimum of like CMF funding, right?
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
it was a big chunk of work to even get what we film what we did. We're in community for days to profile multiple communities and multiple technologies and talking with researchers, talking with energy developers, and talking with community leaders that were leading the charge in their community. And
Yeah.
it was like, how it is when you're filming. It's like 16-hour, 20-hour days when you're in community and trying to tell the stories that are like actually real, right? And it's just not about like green storytelling, but it's really about telling the stories of the actual like kind of present day heroes that are unsung, and
Totally.
yeah, and I just went to
Hmm.
Parliament actually a few weeks ago, and met with we're part of a coalition, Sacred Earth, of close to 20 organizations across the countries, from like doctors to union leaders to us as Indigenous energy quote unquote experts and environmental and climate folks, and like we met with close to 40 members of Parliament and senators, and a lot of them were like, can you send me the links of Power to the People? And I was like, okay. Because they're like, we want stories. And I'm like, the fact that even MPs can access this information, like it should be all over the news. It should be all over the media. And of course, we know why it's not. But it's these things exist. And I think that's the thing that kind of helps combat the climate despair of knowing that these things exist. And I feel like sometimes it's intentionally again the erasure of these stories that really can be the balm and soothing of our hearts, and then also spurring more people onto action.
100%.
I love it.
They're so inspiring. And like you said, it just spurs people to action. And you see, you see others do it, you want to do it yourself. You want to figure out, what that is in your community and go after it, right? Because you're not alone. And you realize you're not alone. So it's
And really be
super.
climate resilient. It's like
Mhm.
we really need to prepare our communities, and we're at a place where we're not.
Yeah. Yeah.
And let's be clear, no communities are. I mean, I think this is we're all just precariously hanging in there. I mean, think about I think of this all the time, like even the food systems. I mean, right, everybody's like 8 hours away from running out of everything. It's like, oh God.
It's kind
Mm-hmm.
of like sometimes I'll just wake up and look around. Look around. Like if you really start digging into, if you're in a city and you go to the grocery store and there's no food, what are you going to do? Like, you know what I mean? Like just start paying attention.
Yeah.
So yeah, yeah.
Community gardens is where it's at. And I know it's
Mhm.
like too bad people didn't stay with it during COVID. I think a lot of people built them and then they're probably in their backyard. Hopefully there's some amazing stories where there's like
I think
these
it's going
amazing,
more and
you know?
more.
I
You
hope
know,
so.
I hope so too.
it's interesting because I've been doing a lot of thinking around. I was in the States for a little bit, and there's this loneliness epidemic. There's a lot of people are struggling and to connect, and I'm like, well, why don't people do like a gardening initiative or like a community garden initiative that has a social element that goes food. Everybody's welcome as long as you adhere to the principles, and you could do this everywhere. And then someone told me, like, oh, you mean like the victory gardens from World War II? And I was like, oh, I didn't know about that. Right. And they went out and they did that. They did that because
Mm-hmm.
they needed food, of course, because there were rations. So, and then created community initiatives all over. I'm like, we've done this stuff before. In
Yeah.
fact, right?
Why is there an amnesia to it? You know what I mean? Like it's the
Yeah.
same thing. I think I
Yeah.
walked by one in New York and been like, someone told me, I was like, okay, you know, but
Yeah. Right. And I think this is where, your work and Indigenous peoples have an opportunity to continue to show us the way. and a connection back to land and self. So yeah, thank you.
The hope. Thank you. Yeah.
Well, this has been just a lovely conversation. Really, really appreciate it.
Thank you. Yeah, it's nice to talk with you both too. It's talk with some like-minded people, and yeah, thanks for inviting me onto the show, and happy to send more resources and links if folks are interested.
Totally.
Please, where can they find you?
Yeah.
You can find me, well, our website is SacredEarth, one word, .solar. So you can find our website and find a lot of our video, like project videos and the Just Transition Guide and more about us on the website. And you can also find us on Instagram at SacredEarth and just look us up. I think it's SacredEarth Soul, SOL. And then me would be, my IG would be Melina _ and then my Cree name. That's going to be hard for people. But if you just look up Melina Laboucan-Massimo, I'll pop up. Okay. Not that that's any easier to find, but yeah, people can find me there. And yeah, that's, I'd say, the biggest. And I think we're also on Facebook for the older generation that love their Facebook time. We also are on Facebook at SacredEarth Solar, and then Melina Laboucan-Massimo too.
Fantastic. Awesome. Thank you so much.
Yeah,
thank you for all that you're doing. I mean, it's really amazing. So thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, it's actually the team. I'm really so excited about the team we have at SacredEarth. It makes it a lot easier to stay in the work when you have a good team around you and you kind of have a shared vision, values. It's really loving our SacredEarth team. We're doing some really fun stuff across the country.
Fantastic. Go team.
Yay.
All right, thank you.
Right.
Our designer is Aaliyah Kane. Music is by Peter Chapman. Social media is by Picnic Social. Our editor and producer is Rachel Werble.